Next, let's talk about sea climates, which are climates that are fairly wet but fairly mild. They have more ocean influence than do some of the others. So from California up into the Pacific Northwest, the Southeast US, the Western Europe, and China, Japan, and other places in the northern and southern hemisphere have what we call mild mid-latitude climates, or mesothermal. But probably easiest is to call them all sea climates. This is the distribution of sea climates. There is some difference between those you find on west coasts, some at lower latitudes and some at higher latitudes, and those that you find on east coast. Here on west coast, we have Mediterranean that are farther south. These are dry summer climates, and marine west coast farther north. On east coast, we have one called humid subtropical. So what we'll do is we'll compare Mediterranean and humid subtropical just to illustrate some of the differences between the two. So things that affect temperature and precipitation are latitude and position within a landmass. And the position within a landmass can also mean if you're on a west coast versus an east coast. Because of the direction of ocean currents and winds, each coast is affected differently, where wind and currents, wind is blowing in from west to east up here in the mid-latitudes, bringing more precipitation, but blowing from the equator up to provide different types of precipitation on east coast. West coasts also have colder ocean currents, and east coasts have warmer ocean currents. And so what that means is that the east coasts tend to have warmer water off their coast during the summer, whereas west coasts tend to have colder water. This helps promote more summer rain on east coast and less summer rain on west coast. So these are two primary climate types. Actually three, but we're going to highlight two. Mediterranean climates, the thing that is most notable about them is their dry summers. So in this graph here, you see rain in the winter, but it really drops off going into summer. These are more common on west coast. By contrast, this one here, humid subtropical, in this chart, actually gets more rain during the summer. This is in New Orleans, Louisiana. This one here is in Red Bluff in Northern California. One reason for these changes in patterns on west coast is that we get an area that it's called high pressure that moves back and forth throughout the year, and California sits a little above 30 degrees north, and during the summertime that dry system sits over California and helps to prevent rainfall. One thing I'll highlight here is that you have Mediterranean climates in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and if you look at a graph of each, they look quite different from each other, and it's really because each one is an opposite seasonal pattern, or 6 months off. So we say our summer is dry, but our summer is in July and August. So here it's hot and rainfall is low. This one in Chile, their summer is going to be here in January and December, so that's when they're hotter, and that's when they get less rainfall. But both are the same climate, just in different hemispheres. If we were to rearrange the months on this one so that they go from July through June, then they would actually look a bit more similar to the northern hemisphere. But when we arrange them both in the same way, they look different from each other. If we use January through December. Same goes for humid subtropical. Northern hemisphere has one pattern and an opposite pattern in the southern hemisphere. Just a few images. This is Mediterranean environments in Southern California. This is known as oak woodland and chaparral vegetation in the background. Here's some picture. This is chaparral. This is shrubby vegetation, and also oak woodlands. And these are the typical types of landscapes you see in Mediterranean environments. This is the Mediterranean vegetation zone where you have a dominance of chaparral and oak woodland. And so in California, we can zoom in and look at it in red here. It surrounds the Central Valley, and throughout the coastal areas, a little bit in the foothills. This part in the Central Valley is a bit drier, so it's considered steppe or a B climate. And the difference is in the amount of rainfall. So Fresno and Red Bluff kind of look like each other. Both have relatively dry summers, like Red Bluff here and Fresno there. But one difference is that the total amount of rainfall is lower than the total amount of rainfall in Red Bluff. So while Red Bluff is classified as Mediterranean, Fresno, because of its dryness, is classified as steppe. Here's just some images. Humid. This is in China. This is a humid subtropical climate. Here is in Mississippi in the U.S. South, humid subtropical as well. The third that we didn't talk about as much is on West Coast, but at higher latitudes. These are called marine West Coast climates, and these are common in higher latitudes, like in Western Europe, like in England and France, and also in the Northwest, like the West Coast of Canada. These tend to get more rain than Mediterranean environments.